Sometimes, the people who leave quietly are carrying the heaviest secrets. The Greyhound bus hissed to a stop just after 6 o'clock in the morning, its brakes cutting through the silence of the nearly empty station. Emily Carter sat motionless for a moment, one hand resting protectively over the gentle curve beneath her beige coat. 5 months. 5 long months since she had left this town without looking back. 5 months since she had walked away from everything she thought she wanted. The driver opened the luggage compartment, and the cold October air slipped inside the bus. Around her, passengers stood and gathered their belongings, eager to continue their lives. Emily remained seated for another few seconds, staring through the window at the familiar streets beyond the station. Nothing had changed. The same diner with the faded blue sign stood across the road. The same church steeple rose above the rooftops. The same town that had once held all her dreams waited outside. Yet everything inside her was different now. Slowly, she stood and lifted her worn duffel bag from the seat beside her. The movement was careful, deliberate. At 28 years old, Emily had learned that life could change faster than anyone expected. One wrong assumption, one painful misunderstanding, one sentence spoken in anger. That was all it took. She stepped off the bus and onto the pavement. The early morning air smelled faintly of coffee and fallen leaves. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes and let the cool breeze brush against her face. She hadn't planned to come back. In truth, she had spent months promising herself she never would. But life rarely listened to promises. The letter from the county office had arrived 3 weeks earlier, informing her that several important employment records still required her signature in person. Ignoring it could create complications later. So she had booked the cheapest ticket she could find and convinced herself she would stay only one day. Sign the documents. Visit the records office. Leave before sunset. That had been the plan. A simple plan. A safe plan. But as Emily adjusted the strap of her bag and began walking toward Main Street, a strange feeling settled in her chest. This town had always been small. Small enough that people remembered faces. Small enough that rumors traveled faster than facts. Small enough that secrets rarely stayed buried forever. She lowered her gaze as she passed a bakery opening for the morning rush. A few customers chatted near the entrance. No one recognized her. Not yet. Relief mixed with disappointment in a way she couldn't explain. 5 months ago, everyone knew who Emily Carter was. She had been the assistant who worked directly for Nathan Whitmore, the billionaire CEO whose family practically owned half the county. People used to smile when they saw her walking beside him during charity events or company functions. They used to wonder if there was something more between them. They had no idea how right they were. Emily swallowed hard and continued walking. The memory still hurt. Not because she missed the luxury. Not because she missed the expensive offices or the glamorous events. She missed the man she thought she knew. The man who used to stay late helping employees solve problems. The man who remembered birthdays and sent flowers to sick workers. The man who once made her believe that kindness could exist alongside power. Then one terrible night had shattered everything. She pushed the thought away. Dwelling on the past would solve nothing. Her future mattered now, especially the tiny future growing beneath her heart. As she reached the corner of Maple Avenue, a familiar voice suddenly called out from across the street. Emily. Her entire body froze. Slowly, she turned. Standing outside a small flower shop was Margaret Whitmore, Nathan's mother. The elegant woman held a bouquet of white roses in one hand and stared at Emily as though she had seen a ghost. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears. Of all the people she might encounter first, she had never imagined it would be Margaret. The older woman's eyes moved downward. Her expression changed instantly. Surprise, confusion, then something deeper. Her gaze settled on the unmistakable curve beneath Emily's coat. The bouquet slipped slightly in her hand. "Oh my goodness," Margaret whispered. Emily felt her throat tighten. The town had seen her before Nathan did. And somehow, she knew that everything she had worked so hard to keep hidden was about to become impossible to hide. Margaret Whitmore looked as though the ground beneath her had shifted. The white roses trembled slightly in her hand while her eyes remained fixed on Emily's stomach. For several long seconds, the noise of the street seemed to disappear. The passing cars, the distant chatter from the bakery, even the rustling leaves overhead faded into silence. Emily felt exposed in a way she had not anticipated. She had prepared herself for paperwork. She had prepared herself for curious stares from strangers. She had even prepared herself for the possibility of seeing Nathan from a distance. But she had not prepared herself for this. "Emily," Margaret said softly, taking a cautious step forward. "I had no idea." Emily forced a polite smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore." The older woman opened her mouth as if searching for the right words. None seemed to come. Finally, she glanced back toward the flower shop and then returned her attention to Emily. "How long have you been back?" "About 15 minutes. Margaret gave a nervous laugh. "Then this town is already working faster than ever." Emily knew exactly what she meant. News traveled quickly here. By lunchtime, half the town would know she had returned. By dinner, people would be creating explanations of their own. "I am only here for the day," Emily said gently. "I have some documents to sign." Margaret nodded, though her expression suggested she was barely listening. Her gaze drifted downward once more. "And the baby?" Emily instinctively placed a hand over her stomach. "The baby is healthy." Something softened in Margaret's face. A sadness, a regret Emily could not quite identify. Before either woman could continue, the low growl of an approaching engine echoed from the other side of the street. Emily turned automatically. A sleek black SUV slowed near the curb. Her heartbeat stumbled. She knew that vehicle. She remembered countless mornings climbing into the passenger seat with reports balanced on her lap. She remembered long drives to charity events and board meetings. She remembered believing she belonged somewhere inside that world. The driver's side door opened. Emily stopped breathing. Nathan Whitmore stepped onto the sidewalk. 5 months should have been enough time to erase certain feelings. It should have been enough time to dull old memories. Instead, seeing him again felt like reopening a letter she had spent months trying not to read. He looked almost exactly the same. Tall, composed, dark navy coat. The kind of effortless confidence that made people turn their heads when he entered a room. Yet there was something different too. Something heavier around his eyes. Nathan glanced toward his mother first. Then he noticed Emily. Everything about him froze. The world seemed to pause with him. Emily watched the recognition strike. First surprise, then disbelief, then confusion. His gaze moved from her face to the gentle curve beneath her coat. The color drained from his expression. Margaret whispered his name, but he barely appeared to hear her. Emily suddenly became aware of every beat of her heart, every breath, every pair of eyes that might be watching from nearby windows. Nathan took one slow step forward. Emily. Her name sounded unfamiliar in his voice, as though he had repeated it 1,000 times in private and still could not believe she was standing there. She straightened her shoulders. "Hello, Nathan." His eyes never left her stomach. Questions filled his face before a single word reached his lips. Emily had imagined this moment more times than she cared to admit. In some versions he was angry. In others he was indifferent. In none of them had he looked completely shattered. "You disappeared," he said quietly. Emily swallowed. "You gave me every reason to." The words landed between them. Sharp, honest, unavoidable. Nathan flinched almost imperceptibly. Then his gaze returned once more to the child she carried. The silence stretched. Finally, with a voice that sounded nothing like the confident billionaire the town admired, he asked the question neither of them could escape. "Emily, is that baby mine?" The question hung in the cold morning air, like a bell that had been struck and could not be silenced. Emily felt every muscle in her body tighten. Across the street, a delivery truck rumbled past. Someone exited the bakery carrying a paper cup of coffee. Life continued around them, completely unaware that her entire world had just narrowed to a single moment. Nathan waited for an answer. His eyes searched her face with an intensity that made it difficult to breathe. 5 months ago, she would have told him everything. 5 months ago, she would have trusted him with every fear, every hope, every impossible dream. But 5 months ago, he had shattered that trust with one sentence. Emily lowered her gaze for a moment before looking back at him. "You lost the right to ask that question 5 months ago." The words landed harder than she intended. Nathan looked as though he had been struck by a wave he never saw coming. Margaret quietly stepped back, sensing that whatever happened next belonged only to them. Nathan swallowed. "Emily, please." She almost laughed at the irony. Nathan Whitmore rarely asked anyone for anything. People usually competed for his attention. They waited months for meetings. Entire companies adjusted their schedules around his decisions. Yet now there was something desperate in his voice. "Please what?" Emily asked softly. Please tell me the truth. Nathan opened his hands helplessly. I deserve that much. Emily stared at him. Do you? Silence followed. Nathan did not answer because they both knew the truth. 5 months earlier, she had stood inside his office on the top floor of Whitmore Holdings while rain pounded against the windows. She remembered every detail with painful clarity. The smell of coffee growing cold on his desk. The city lights blurred by the storm. The folder lying open between them. The accusations. Someone had leaked confidential information regarding a major acquisition. Millions of dollars were at stake. The board demanded answers. Evidence had pointed toward her employee credentials. She had spent hours insisting she was innocent. Hours begging him to believe her. Nathan had listened without interruption. That was almost worse. She would have preferred anger. She would have preferred shouting. Instead, he had remained calm, controlled, distant, until he finally looked at her and said the words she would never forget. I should have known a woman from your background would eventually want something more than the job. Emily had felt her heart break so quietly that nobody else could hear it. Not even him. She had spent 3 years proving herself. 3 years working late nights. 3 years believing he respected her. And in a single moment, he reduced her to a stereotype. A poor girl chasing money. A woman looking for an opportunity. Not someone he loved. Not someone he trusted. Just someone convenient to blame. The following morning she resigned. 2 days later she left town. 3 weeks after that, she discovered she was pregnant. Nathan's voice pulled her back to the present. I was wrong. Emily blinked. The word surprised her because Nathan Whitmore almost never admitted mistakes. I know that now, he continued quietly. But at the time, he stopped. His jaw tightened. At the time I believed what I was shown. Emily shook her head. You believed what was easiest. Nathan looked away. That hurt because it was true. A gust of wind scattered a few leaves across the sidewalk. Somewhere nearby, a church bell rang 7 times. The town was waking up. Soon more people would arrive. More questions would follow. More eyes would notice them standing together. Nathan took a careful step forward. Emily, if there is even a chance that child is mine, I need to know. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach again. Beneath her palm, the future felt suddenly very real. Very fragile. For months, she had protected this secret. For months, she had built walls around herself because it was the only way to survive. Now the man responsible for half her pain stood before her looking completely lost. Emily drew a slow breath. Then she said the one thing she had sworn she would never say aloud in this town again. The baby was conceived the week before I left. Nathan's face went completely still. And for the first time since seeing him that morning, Emily realized he was beginning to understand exactly what he had lost. For a moment, Nathan Whitmore looked like a man who had forgotten how to breathe. The morning traffic continued behind him. A cyclist passed on the opposite side of the street. Someone laughed near the bakery. Yet none of it seemed to reach him. His entire world had narrowed to a single realization. The timeline fit. Perfectly. Painfully. Emily watched the truth settle across his face. 5 months ago, during the final week before everything fell apart, they had still believed there was a future ahead of them. They had shared late dinners after work. Long conversations about dreams neither of them had told anyone else. Nathan had spoken about expanding scholarship programs across the state. Emily had confessed that she wanted to create a foundation helping single parents return to school. Back then, the future had felt wide open. Then came the accusations, the investigation, the betrayal, the goodbye. Nathan slowly lowered his eyes. For the first time since she had known him, he seemed completely uncertain of himself. You found out after you left? He asked quietly. Emily nodded. 3 weeks later. Nathan closed his eyes briefly. The answer seemed to hit harder than anything else. 3 weeks. While he had been attending board meetings, negotiating contracts, and convincing himself he had made the correct decision, Emily had been carrying a secret that changed everything. Why did you not tell me? He finally asked. Emily almost smiled, though there was no humor in it. Because I spent months trying to tell you who I really was, and you never believed me when it mattered. Nathan looked down at the sidewalk. There was no defense for that. No explanation strong enough to erase what had happened. Across the street, Margaret stood quietly near the flower shop window. She was pretending not to watch, but Emily could see the concern written across her face. Nathan followed Emily's gaze. His mother immediately looked away. Another uncomfortable silence settled between them. Then Nathan spoke again. Where have you been living? Emily hesitated. 2 counties over. Alone? Yes. Nathan's jaw tightened. Working, of course. She folded her arms lightly. Life does not stop because your heart gets broken. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Nathan flinched. Emily regretted it immediately, not because it was untrue, but because she hated how vulnerable it made her sound. She had spent 5 months rebuilding herself. She did not want him seeing the pieces she had struggled to put back together. Nathan stared at her for several seconds. Were you struggling? Emily laughed softly. This time there was humor, but it was tired humor. The kind that came from surviving difficult days. Nathan, I was pregnant, unemployed, and living in a town where nobody knew me. His expression darkened. You should not have had to go through that alone. Maybe not. She looked directly at him. But I did. A church bell echoed again in the distance. 8 o'clock now. The town was fully awake. More people were appearing along Main Street. A few curious glances had already started drifting their way. Emily checked the time on her phone. She still had documents to sign at the county building. The longer she stayed here, the harder everything would become. She adjusted the strap of her duffel bag. I need to go. Nathan immediately stepped forward. Emily, wait. She stopped but did not turn around. What? His voice softened. Please let me help. Emily closed her eyes. There it was. The offer she had known would come eventually. Money, resources, solutions. Nathan had spent his entire life solving problems. But some things could not be repaired with influence or wealth. Slowly she faced him again. Do you know what the hardest part was? She asked. Nathan shook his head. The hardest part was not the money. It was not the job. It was waking up every morning knowing the person I trusted most believed the worst about me. Nathan said nothing. Because there was nothing to say. Emily took a steady breath and turned toward the county building at the end of the street. She had managed 3 steps before a familiar voice called from behind them. Nathan. Both of them looked up. A silver luxury sedan had just pulled to the curb. The driver's door opened. A tall blonde woman stepped onto the sidewalk wearing an elegant cream-colored coat. Emily recognized her immediately. Vanessa Hale. The woman Nathan had become engaged to less than 2 months after Emily disappeared. And judging by the shock on Vanessa's face when she saw Emily standing there, she recognized her too. Vanessa Hale stopped beside her car, and for a brief second the confidence that usually surrounded her seemed to vanish. Her eyes moved from Nathan to Emily and finally settled on the unmistakable curve beneath Emily's coat. The color drained from her face almost instantly. Emily noticed it. Nathan noticed it too. Nobody spoke. The October wind stirred a few loose leaves across the sidewalk, while passing cars rolled through downtown unaware that 3 lives had just collided at the worst possible moment. Vanessa recovered first. Years of charity galas, corporate events, and public appearances had taught her how to hide discomfort behind a polished smile. Emily, she said carefully, I did not realize you were back in town. Emily offered a small nod. Neither did I until this morning. Vanessa attempted a laugh, but it sounded strained. Her attention returned to Emily's stomach. You look well. The lie was obvious. Emily knew she looked exhausted after the overnight bus ride. She also knew Vanessa was not interested in her health. She was trying to calculate dates. Trying to calculate possibilities. Nathan stepped forward before Emily could respond. Vanessa, what are you doing here? His voice was colder than before. Vanessa blinked. Your mother invited me to breakfast. Margaret Whitmore looked genuinely surprised. I did, but not for another hour. An uncomfortable silence followed. Vanessa shifted her purse on her shoulder. I arrived early. Emily suddenly felt tired. Not physically tired. Emotionally tired. She had spent months building distance between herself and this place. Now, within less than an hour of arriving, she was standing in the middle of a conversation she never wanted to have. She tightened her grip on her duffel bag. I really need to go. Nathan immediately turned toward her. Emily. She shook her head. No. His expression hardened with determination. We are not finished talking. Maybe you are. Not finished, she replied softly. I finished 5 months ago. The words left a visible mark. Nathan looked away. Vanessa watched the exchange carefully. Too carefully. Emily noticed something strange then. It lasted only a second. A flicker of nervousness crossing Vanessa's face whenever the conversation drifted toward the past. It disappeared almost immediately, but Emily caught it. Before she could think more about it, a sudden flutter rolled through her stomach. She instinctively placed her hand over the movement. Everything else disappeared. The street, the tension, the memories. For one beautiful moment, there was only her child. A small reminder that she was never truly alone anymore. Nathan noticed the gesture. His eyes followed her hand. Something changed in his expression. Wonder, fear, hope, all at once. Did the baby move? He asked quietly. Emily hesitated, then nodded. Nathan stared as though he had just witnessed a miracle. Vanessa's posture stiffened. Margaret's eyes filled with emotion. Emily looked away. The moment felt far too personal to share. Her phone suddenly buzzed inside her coat pocket. Grateful for the interruption, she pulled it out. The county office. Her appointment reminder. 10 minutes. She glanced toward the courthouse at the end of Main Street. I have paperwork to finish. Nathan immediately reached for his keys. I will drive you. No, Emily. No, Nathan. Her voice remained calm but firm. I took care of myself yesterday. I can take care of myself today. Margaret unexpectedly stepped forward. She is right. Both Nathan and Vanessa looked at her. Margaret's gaze never left her son. Sometimes helping means giving someone room to breathe. Nathan looked frustrated, but he did not argue. Emily appreciated that more than he probably realized. She adjusted her bag and started toward the courthouse. After a few steps, she glanced back. Nathan was still standing exactly where she left him. Watching, not speaking, not moving, just watching her walk away. Then something happened that she did not see. As soon as Emily disappeared around the corner, Margaret Whitmore slowly turned toward Vanessa. The warmth vanished from her face. Tell me something, Margaret said quietly. Vanessa swallowed. What? Margaret's eyes narrowed. Why do you suddenly look terrified? The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish. Emily sat alone on a wooden bench outside the records office, one hand resting over her stomach while the other held a numbered ticket. Around her, people came and went carrying folders, tax forms, and property documents. Nobody knew who she was. Nobody knew that less than an hour earlier, her carefully protected world had been shaken apart. For the first time that morning, she finally had a moment to breathe. She leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. The baby shifted again. A small movement. Gentle. Reassuring. Emily smiled despite everything. It is okay, she whispered under her breath. We are okay. The records appointment lasted less than 20 minutes. A clerk reviewed several employment documents, verified her identification, and requested a few signatures. Emily completed everything quietly. No complications. No delays. Exactly what she had hoped for. By 11 o'clock, she stepped back outside into the cool autumn sunshine. The sky had turned a brilliant shade of blue, the kind of day that made people forget winter was coming. She adjusted the strap of her bag and headed toward the bus station. Her return ticket departed at 4 in the afternoon. 5 more hours. Then she could leave this town behind again. At least that had been the plan. Halfway down Main Street, her phone rang. An unfamiliar local number appeared on the screen. Emily hesitated before answering. Hello. Emily. The voice belonged to Margaret Whitmore. Emily stopped walking. Mrs. Whitmore, please do not hang up. Emily glanced toward the street. I was not planning to. Margaret sounded unusually nervous. Could you meet me for lunch? Emily immediately shook her head, even though Margaret could not see it. I do not think that is a good idea. Please. There was genuine emotion in her voice now. Not for Nathan. For me. Emily remained silent. There are things I need to tell you, Margaret continued quietly. Things I should have said months ago. Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. What kind of things? Several seconds passed. Then Margaret answered with a sentence that changed everything. Things about Vanessa. Emily froze. Across the street, a traffic light switched from red to green. Cars moved forward. People crossed intersections. Yet Emily could hear only the pounding of her own heartbeat. What about Vanessa? She asked. Margaret lowered her voice. I cannot discuss it over the phone. Emily swallowed. Every instinct told her to walk away, to board her bus and never return. But another feeling had started growing inside her since arriving that morning. A feeling she had spent months suppressing. Questions. Too many unanswered questions. Where? Emily finally asked. St. Mark's Church, Margaret replied. 1 o'clock. The call ended. Emily stared at the screen for a long moment. St. Mark's Church sat on the edge of town, overlooking a small lake. It was quiet. Private. A strange place for a conversation like this. Meanwhile, 3 miles away, Nathan Whitmore sat alone inside his office. The massive windows overlooked the entire town, but he barely noticed the view. His attention remained fixed on a single photograph displayed on his desk. The photograph showed an employee appreciation dinner from 2 years earlier. Nearly 100 people stood smiling toward the camera. Nathan's eyes ignored all of them except one. Emily. She stood near the center wearing a simple blue dress, laughing at something outside the frame. Happy, trusting, completely unaware of what the future would bring. A sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he said. The door opened. His chief of security stepped inside carrying a folder. "You asked me to review the original investigation." Nathan stood immediately, and the man placed the folder on the desk. "Sir, there is something you need to see." Nathan opened it. Within seconds, the color disappeared from his face. Because buried inside the old evidence was a detail nobody had questioned 5 months earlier. A detail connecting the data breach directly to Vanessa Hale. St. Mark's Church stood quietly above the lake, its white steeple reflecting in the still water below. Emily arrived 10 minutes early. She had always preferred arriving early. It gave her time to think, time to prepare, time to steady her emotions before difficult conversations. Today she needed all three. She sat alone on a wooden bench near the edge of the property and watched sunlight dance across the surface of the lake. The peaceful scenery felt strangely disconnected from the storm building inside her mind. At exactly 1 o'clock, a dark sedan pulled into the gravel parking area. Margaret Whitmore stepped out carrying a small leather folder. She looked older than Emily remembered. Not physically older, just tired. The kind of tiredness that came from carrying regret. Margaret approached slowly and sat beside her. Neither woman spoke for several moments. Finally, Margaret opened the folder in her lap. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. Emily looked toward the water. "For what?" Margaret released a slow breath. "For staying silent when I should have spoken." Emily turned toward her. Margaret's hands trembled slightly. 5 months ago, I noticed things that did not make sense." Emily frowned. "What things?" Margaret removed several printed pages from the folder. Vanessa spent an unusual amount of time around the executive offices during the investigation. At first I ignored it. Then I learned she had private meetings with 2 board members involved in reviewing the evidence. Emily stared at the documents. "You never told Nathan?" Shame crossed Margaret's face. "I mentioned my concerns once. And he thought I was looking for reasons to dislike his fiancée." The words settled heavily between them. Emily lowered her eyes. That sounded exactly like something Nathan would have believed at the time. Meanwhile, across town, Nathan remained inside his office. The investigation file lay open across his desk. Every page seemed to expose another mistake, another overlooked detail, another reason he should have questioned the conclusions reached months ago. His chief of security stood nearby. "The login credentials used during the breach were Emily's," the man explained. "But the access request originated from a secondary authorization terminal." Nathan looked up sharply. "Which terminal?" The answer came immediately. "The executive guest office." Nathan felt his stomach drop. Vanessa had used that office repeatedly during the weeks before the breach. Why was this never investigated, he demanded. The security chief hesitated. Because someone instructed the review team to focus exclusively on Emily's credentials. Nathan slowly stood. "Who?" The room fell silent. Then the man answered. "Vanessa Hale." Back at the church, Emily listened as Margaret continued revealing details she had hidden for months. Small details by themselves. Meaningless details. But together they painted a disturbing picture. Vanessa had inserted herself into the investigation at every opportunity. She had attended meetings she was never required to attend. Requested updates she had no reason to receive. Asked unusual questions about Emily's role within the company. Emily felt cold despite the warm afternoon sun. "Why are you telling me this now?" Margaret's eyes filled with emotion. "Because this morning I saw your face when Nathan asked about the baby." Her voice softened, and I realized my silence helped destroy 2 lives. Before Emily could respond, another vehicle entered the church parking lot. Both women turned. A black SUV rolled to a stop near the entrance. Nathan stepped out. He looked directly at Emily, then at his mother. Then he began walking toward them. There was something different about him now. Something resolved. Something certain. Emily's pulse quickened. Nathan stopped a few feet away. His eyes never left hers. For several seconds he simply stood there, struggling to find the right words. Finally, he spoke. "Emily," he said quietly, "I know who framed you." Emily felt the air leave her lungs. The lake behind them remained perfectly still, but inside her, everything shifted. Nathan's words echoed through her mind. "I know who framed you." For months, she had replayed that final week over and over, searching for some explanation that made sense. Some reason the man she loved had looked at her with suspicion instead of trust. Now, standing beneath the shadow of the church steeple, she realized the truth might have been far worse than she imagined. Nathan took another step forward. His face carried none of the confidence that usually accompanied him. There was only regret. Deep, unmistakable regret. "The security review uncovered evidence that should have been found months ago," he said quietly. "Evidence linking Vanessa directly to the breach." Emily stared at him. "You are certain?" Nathan nodded. "I wish I was not." Margaret lowered her eyes. The pain on her face made it clear she already knew what Nathan was about to reveal. Nathan pulled several printed pages from a folder tucked beneath his arm. The access requests came from a terminal Vanessa frequently used. Multiple review notes were altered. Witness statements were redirected. Every trail somehow pointed toward you because someone made sure it did. Emily looked at the papers but did not reach for them. 5 months ago, she would have demanded proof. Today, she simply felt tired. "And now?" she asked softly. Nathan's voice cracked slightly. "Now I know I failed you." The honesty of the statement caught her off guard. Nathan Whitmore had built a billion-dollar company by projecting certainty. Yet there was no certainty left in him now, only accountability. A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the horizon. Dark clouds had begun gathering beyond the lake. Autumn weather in this part of the state could change quickly. Emily folded her arms lightly against the breeze. Knowing the truth does not change what happened. Nathan lowered his head. "I know. It does not erase those months. I know. It does not erase waking up alone wondering how I was going to build a future for my child." Nathan closed his eyes briefly. "I know." The repetition hurt more than excuses would have, because he was not defending himself. He was accepting every word. Emily looked away toward the water. For so long she had imagined this moment. She had imagined proving her innocence. Imagined Nathan apologizing. Imagined the satisfaction she would feel when the truth finally surfaced. Instead, she felt sadness. Nothing more. The wind strengthened, lifting strands of hair across her face. Suddenly, a cold drop of rain landed on her hand. Then, another. Within seconds, a light shower began falling across the church grounds. Margaret stood. "We should go inside." But before anyone moved, Emily felt a sharp tightening low in her abdomen. Not pain, just discomfort. Enough to make her pause. Nathan noticed instantly. "Emily." She placed a hand against her stomach and took a slow breath. "I am fine." Another drop of rain struck her coat. Nathan stepped closer. "You do not look fine." "I am pregnant, Nathan. Not made of glass." Despite the seriousness of the moment, Margaret smiled faintly. It sounded exactly like the Emily she remembered. The shower intensified. Rain tapped against the church windows and darkened the gravel beneath their feet. Nathan removed his coat without hesitation and held it above her shoulders. Emily almost protested. Then another cool gust swept across the lake, and she allowed the gesture. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there beneath the rain, sharing the same shelter. Nathan looked down toward the hand resting over her stomach. His expression softened. "I cannot change the past," he said quietly. "But if that child is mine, and even if you never forgive me, I want to spend the rest of my life earning the right to be there." Emily felt tears threaten for the first time all day. Not because of the promise, not because of the apology, but because for the first time since everything fell apart, she believed he meant every word. The rain continued falling as they stepped inside St. Mark's Church. The sanctuary was quiet except for the soft tapping of water against stained glass windows. Emily sat in the last pew, exhausted from everything the day had become. She had arrived that morning expecting signatures and paperwork. Instead, she had uncovered the truth behind the worst chapter of her life. Nathan remained a respectful distance away. He did not pressure her. He did not ask for forgiveness. For the first time since she had known him, he seemed to understand that some wounds healed on their own timetable. Several minutes passed before Emily finally spoke. "What happens now?" Nathan looked at the wooden floor for a moment before answering. "Vanessa will face the consequences of what she did." The board already knows. The engagement is over. Emily nodded slowly. The words should have felt satisfying. Instead, they simply felt final. A chapter closing. Nothing more. Margaret quietly reached across the pew and squeezed Emily's hand. "I am sorry," she whispered. "For all of it." Emily studied the older woman. There were tears in her eyes. Real tears. Not for appearances. Not for reputation. For regret. Emily realized then that everyone had lost something because of a lie. She placed her hand gently over Margaret's. "Thank you for telling me the truth." Outside, the rain began to ease. A shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds and painted ribbons of color across the church floor through the stained glass. The moment felt strangely peaceful. Nathan stood slowly. "There is one more thing." Emily looked up. He seemed nervous again, almost vulnerable. "What?" Nathan pulled a small envelope from his jacket pocket. "I found this while reviewing old files." He handed it to her. Emily opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, one she immediately recognized. Her resignation letter. The one she had submitted 5 months ago. Her eyes moved across the page until they reached a note written in the corner. A note she had never seen before. Nathan's handwriting. The date was from the day after she left. The words were simple. "Find her. Make this right." Emily stared at the sentence. "You wrote this?" Nathan nodded. "The morning after you left." Emily looked confused. "Then why did nobody contact me?" Nathan's expression darkened. "Because Vanessa intercepted the request before it reached my staff." Emily closed her eyes. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Another painful truth. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed something she had missed before. Nathan looked tired. Not physically tired. Soul tired. Like a man carrying 5 months of guilt. Slowly, Emily stood. The baby shifted gently beneath her hand. Nathan's eyes followed the movement. Neither of them spoke. Words suddenly felt unnecessary. Emily stepped closer. Not all the way. Just enough. Then, after a long moment, she took Nathan's hand and placed it against her stomach. Time seemed to stop. Nathan froze. His eyes widened slightly. A second later, the baby moved. A tiny kick. Small. Perfect. Real. Nathan's breath caught. For the first time all day, tears filled his eyes. He did not try to hide them. Emily felt her own eyes sting. Not because everything was fixed. It was not. Trust would take time. Healing would take time. Forgiveness would take time. But for the first time in months, the future no longer felt empty. Nathan looked at her. "Thank you." Emily gave a small smile. "Do not thank me yet." A faint laugh escaped him. The first genuine laugh she had heard from him all day. Outside, the storm had completely passed. Sunlight reflected across the lake, turning the water into liquid gold. Emily glanced toward the church doors and then back at Nathan. "My bus leaves at 4. Nathan nodded. "I know. I still have not decided what happens next." "I know that too." She studied him for a moment. Then she handed him the small bag containing her prenatal vitamins. "You can carry this." Nathan blinked in surprise before accepting it carefully, as though it were the most valuable thing he had ever held. Emily started toward the exit. This time, Nathan walked beside her. Not ahead of her. Not behind her. Beside her. And as they stepped into the sunlight together, neither of them knew exactly where the road would lead. But both finally understood something they had forgotten 5 months earlier. Love was never proven by power, money, or promises. It was proven by who stayed when the truth finally came to light.